So our first wine for this virtual tasting is something that I absolutely love. It's our Nevaeh White 2010. Nevaeh is the name of our estate vineyard. When we started doing our single vineyard wines just a couple years ago, it was the 2009 vintage actually for the whites was the first one where we started designating our vineyards, 2008 for the reds. After I started to get a good impression as to what the individual sites that we were using really expressed. This is a fairly new name to us. I mean, Nevaeh, we'd never really named our vineyard before up until we bottled the 2009 vintage of the Nevaeh White, the 2008 Nevaeh Red, and it's it's a fictitious name, just like the name Tarara. We kind of came up with it. And it's going on that same process as Tarara, taking a word backwards and kind of spinning it into something that we think is kind of cool. Nevaeh is actually heaven backwards, because there's these places all over the world that people really just feel is, I don't know, their own little place, their place where they feel so comfortable. And to me, I mean, that's Nevaeh, that's our vineyard. There's nothing more to me, like there's nothing more, I feel, when you're just out in the vineyard and you're walking with the vines and every day being able to see how the grapes are growing and how they're going to express themselves in the glass, and you can kind of tell from a couple weeks in, or even looking at pruning like what we're doing right now, you could see the new canes that we're laying down and how they're looking from the past year as to how they're going to carry on into this coming vintage, and really already start to get an idea of the depth of the vintage that we can have. So it's really kind of fun. So this first one here is our Nevaeh White from 2010. 2010 was, I mean, quite frankly, it was a simple vintage to make wine, and it was explosive, just crazy amounts of fruit. It was really, it was a vintage where we came in and we threw the stereo on and we rocked out and just had a good time in the cellar because the wines really made themselves. It was pretty incredible. It was so hot and so dry. The concentration is through the roof. It took pretty much it was going into the vineyard and picking at complete leisure. Even though it was completely hot and dry, it was the earliest we've ever started harvest and the latest we've ever finished harvest. With the exception of this year, we did have some more bed that hung pretty long. But it was just because we could pick at our leisure. We just went through it, and it was a matter of just tasting the fruit and waiting for that ideal moment. We didn't feel that there was any pressure. There was no rains coming through. The fruit was all clean. There was no reason not to just let it hang and get the best expression possible. What it did do is it made these just crazy exotic wines that are really unheard of in most of the East Coast, for better or worse. I mean, you could also say that these are not classic terroir wines as to what we chase after, but they are just downright delicious. And I do think that some of these also came through, though, with showing what the actual terroir looks like. In this particular vintage of the Nevaeh White, something we did different because of that incredibly exotic style of wines is we lowered the amount of Viognier, actually. Normally this is a predominantly Viognier based wine. In this particular vintage we went 55% Chardonnay and 45% Viognier. The Chardonnay all comes from a particular block called our Hill Block 2. It's as you come back down from the Potomac River, and then there's a crest that comes back up. It's this limestone crest that we have 1 acre of Chardonnay planted on, where it gets this zippy minerality and helps out the freshness of the wine. We really felt that that was an important part to have in our 2010 in order to balance with the incredibly exuberant and flamboyant fruit of the Viognier, showing off tropical characteristics and floral notes and so on and so forth. So let's give this a little swirl. As I said, I mean, the nose is it's just explosive. I mean, it is a very, very rich wine, but I think that we did a good job in balancing it this particular vintage. A little bit more new oak than normal as well, based on the depth of the vintage, and that Chardonnay was able to handle it. It's about 40% new oak. It's all Jupil forest oak because it's the tightest grain that we could possibly find. and potassic green you can normally find, and it's also a more sustainable wood. The forest, Japeel forest, they have to be a minimum of 150 years old average across the forest for them to be able to harvest any of the trees to go towards these barrels. So it's it's a neat place for sustainability and for high quality, and the wood tends to be on an allocation process to a lot of the cooperages around the world, and we're lucky enough. I mean, we don't order that much because it's only used for our whites. Our reds all go into Virginia oak, but we're lucky enough that we're able to get some of that. But I find the oak really doesn't come through all that heavy in this wine. It's all about, I mean, there's a lot of persimmon and tangerine characteristics, there's floral notes, but it's incredible intensity, and then there is this streak of minerality, this almost chalky like note to it that comes from the limestone soils. As the vines are starting to get older, it's getting a little bit more and more of that developed each year. The palate, let's check it out. You know, this wine, it's about complexity and elegance meets power, which is really kind of a cool way to look at it. Now, when I taste this wine, it's not like a wine that I'd normally have in most other places, just because it is a different blend. I mean, Viognier, Chardonnay, there's not an awful lot of those two blended together. And that's because our thought isn't so much about the varietal as it is about showing what our vineyard is like. And because the Nevaeh vineyard is very windy, and gets a longer hang time, we can hang the grapes, they stay healthy, and they will therefore get more flavor maturity as well. And we can preserve the acidity with that wind. It brings in a lot of cool air from down near the Potomac River and then up through the vineyard, as there's these little gaps that cut through the hills that keeps that freshness to the wine. So it does get that good hang time, and this wine shows. I mean, even being a hot year, we still have a good backbone of acidity to balance off some of the fruit. And then it has that power of the fruit coming forth, and then there is some of this buttery characteristics that come through as well, almost like some blanched almond almost type ideas to it as well. It's really kind of a neat wine to play with, and it's just a wine like no other. It's a wine like Nevaeh. It's an expression of what we think our vineyard can do, showing that really exotic, type fruit balanced with the elegance of that bracing acidity and some good minerality. I'm really excited about how this vintage is going. It's technically not going to be released until May, but as a Vine Club member, many of you have already had an opportunity to get this in your package, so salud. And just for the nerds like me out there that want to know a little bit more, it was, fermented just like all of our single vineyard wines on indigenous yeast. It's not it's not a dead set philosophy, but our goal is to have that minimal handling as much as possible. If things are going in an awkward direction, then we will absolutely use Sakura yeast. But in this one, until that time, we absolutely didn't have to. So it's all indigenous yeast fermentation, very, very natural wine. Just went into barrel for a 10-month élevage. As I said, 40% new barrels on Japeel Forest Oak. And then from there, it's just filtered up and bottled, and it is what it is. It's a product of a fabulous vintage in a vineyard that is just starting to get into its mature ages and really show some stuff. So hope you enjoy, and anytime you have questions for me, please contact.